God of War Ragnarok DLC rumors have surfaced, and at first I was inclined to not believe this at all, but some things have transpired that I think add some credence to these rumors. I want to talk about why I really don't think we need DLC for Ragnarok, especially if it centers around Kratos, but I want to discuss some of the possibilities that we might see with Kratos or Atreus and any potential DLC that's out there. I myself had speculated that we may end up seeing sort of a spin-off game for Atreus himself, just with how much they focused on him. He has his own skill tree. Significant portions of the God of War Ragnarok campaign actually center around you playing as Atreus. That's actually one of my primary criticisms of the game's replay value is I really don't want to replay some of those sections. I found him to be really fun, but he also got very repetitive. I thought a lot of his attacks and things sort of became almost like a single button press, action arcade-ish game, while everything that you're learning to do with Kratos is far more in-depth and complex. Many of the people that claim these games are just movie games or there's not a lot to them. Actually, if you look at any of the footage of people playing this game at a harder difficulty and going into some of the more challenging fights, there is so much depth to what you can actually do with Kratos. I actually felt that created a juxtaposition against Atreus and made those sections not as enjoyable. But I did think, hey, they gave him his entire own skill tree and move sets and all these different things. Why would you not then do like a spin-off? Even at the end of the game, no major spoilers, but they do make it seem as though he's potentially going to kind of go off and maybe do some things just by himself, right? I don't think that's not like a major story spoiler. If you haven't gotten all the way to the end of this game yet, right, you're watching this content sort of recklessly, so I'm not too worried about spoiling things for you. But I do think that if they decided to do DLC, I want to first talk about why I don't think you would want the DLC to center around Kratos himself. I do think that the way the game ended in particular, they really set things up nicely with Kratos' storyline. I think maybe a little bit too clean, maybe a little bit too tidy. That might be a slight criticism. It felt very safe and very neatly tied up sort of at the end. Now, I don't have a problem with that. I think it's okay to have stories that sort of end in that way, but I do think that is one area that would work against the game trying to do some type of Kratos DLC. It just doesn't seem necessary. It would feel almost forced. Now, I will have one sort of caveat here. I do think there is one way in particular that they could do a Kratos DLC, which would essentially be setting up the next game. I would want you to sort of be getting him out of the Norse pantheon, right? It seems as though the story within the Norse world is over for Kratos, especially at the end when you sort of look at everything in the grand scope of how things have transpired. Doing anything else with him, I think, would be unnecessary unless you were doing it sort of as a way to serve up the next game. But then the question would be like, well, what's the point of that? Why would we be doing a DLC? Now, I'm going to be looking at an article from Push Square in a moment here with the claims about this, but I want to give my own speculation about what the most likely outcome of this will be. I could see it being a DLC firmly dedicated to Atreus. I don't even think you would play as Kratos. Like, he might be in it for a moment, maybe like a brief scene or something at the beginning, just because of the amount of time that they invested into Atreus. But I think that just makes more sense as a standalone game. Many of us thought, oh, they're gonna do like a $40 or $50 standalone game, kind of how they did with Uncharted and kind of how they did with Miles Morales, right? You wouldn't be necessarily paying full price for the game. It would almost feel like an offshoot, right? $40 or $50, and then you play the entire game as Atreus. Because again, if it feels like a side piece game or like a separate game, I don't necessarily think you'd want to be paying $70 for it. I also don't know if I would want to play a full-length game for $70 only as Atreus. I think that would be potentially pretty frustrating. I also think they could use the DLC to set up a standalone game for Atreus. If you're going to do a $40 or $50 game with him in the future, maybe you want to kind of set that up or test it out, right? If you're wanting to test people's interest, you could look at the reception to a DLC that you made in a smaller scope and scale. So you could kind of trim it down, make it $20 worth or so, see how well it sells, see what the reception and the reviews are, and then if it does well enough, you could kind of green light and say, okay, let's go full bore. Let's do a whole project here just for Atreus as a side sort of offshoot game. And the reason for that is I don't know if the future of the God of War franchise has room for that type of a game. Many people would just like to see Kratos go to another pantheon of gods. There's speculation about it being Egyptian or Mayan. There's a lot of, ideas being thrown out there. Whenever they voted to do, between Norse and another pantheon, apparently it was like really, really close to a tie. So the developers have been, I think, sort of chomping at the bit to leave behind Norse. That's why they ended up not doing a trilogy. So I think DLC is going to land in a really weird spot if you decide to extend any more of the Norse story, or if you decide to branch off and do your own thing with Atreus. I think the danger and the dilemma there would be is it would feel like this giant departure from God of War. Many people have suggested, like, what about a God of Mischief game where you literally just play as Loki, aka Atreus? And many people that whenever I've suggested that, I have another video kind of about that, they're like, nobody would want to play that. That's not a God of War game. Like, if you're changing the name and you're changing the entire sort of essence of the game. I was just having a conversation with a guy about this today, and just the dangers of innovation, where if you innovate too much, people are like, well, it's not really the same game anymore. It's not really God of War. It's some other thing, and that makes people sort of not want to play it. Like Miles Morales was obviously very much a Spider-Man game, just with different powers, different storyline, and a different main character, but it was still very much Spider-Man. And if you take the Kratos and sort of the fighting style and everything out of the game, you might have a lot of people sort of rejecting it out of hand. So let's take a look at this Push Square article and see what exactly we're looking at. What's the details? Where's this info coming from? And it says here, rumor, God of War Ragnarok DLC is deep in development for the PS5, allegedly around 60% complete. It's kind of a unique stat to throw out there. And so they say here, an expansion to the uber-popular PlayStation first-party exclusive God of War Ragnarok is allegedly deep in development, according to notorious leaker The Snitch. It should be noted that while there was a period where the infamous internet tipster was flawless, the Twitter account has changed hands. Therefore, the reliability of the source is more debatable than before. Recently, the social media snoop revealed seemingly accurate details about Rise of the Ronin, so it does appear to be familiar with Sony's internal affairs. A lot of the times what I think happens here is somebody does have a source. They've got somebody that gets them info, but what you end up with is pieces or snippets of that info. So they end up being somewhat correct or accurate. Now, that's not the same as somebody like Tom Henderson at Insider Gaming. He has legitimate sources within these companies, and he gets very, very solid and reliable information. I think a lot of the times the leakiest parts of these gaming companies are the marketing companies that they work with. They send a bunch of assets and B-roll to the marketing companies, and then somebody there, right, an intern or somebody pulls out their cell phone or is able to sit in on a meeting, and they're able to get, screenshots or some footage of the game. That seems to be one of the more leaky aspects of these things. I don't know if that's where the snitch gets their information, but that's how it typically feels to me. Moving on here, it says, ever since beating God of War Ragnarok campaign, we've been expecting some kind of standalone expansion or DLC to the title. This is for a number of reasons. Without delving too deeply into spoilers, the conclusion to the campaign does seem to set up some kind of standalone Atreus adventure, and it'd also be consistent with Sony's current development philosophy to make a large-scale spin-off based on the content and mechanics of its main game. We've seen this in various guises over the years, from the standalone Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales to the meaty Horizon Forbidden West Burning Shores. And then there was also the Uncharted Lost Legacy, where you played as the two women, like you're basically going back and forth. I mean, I thought that was a great game, and it was a wonderful spin-off, but there was no, you're not playing as Nathan Drake, you're not playing as any of the main characters. And so this, to me, I wonder if they have good information. Do they just have information about the spin-off, or is this actual concrete information about the DLC? Let's continue reading here. The snitch says that development is about 60% complete and that a release is planned next year, which makes sense to us. While we're still a little iffy on the source, we reckon all the information seems logical and consistent with PlayStation's first-party approach, so we expect this rumor to probably turn out to be true. But are you itching for more God of War, and which direction would you also like to see a potential expansion take? Let us know in the comment section below. Now, the reason I think these rumors have got some credence and some credibility is something interesting happened on Twitter. There was somebody who was just sort of tweeting about this, and, you know, all the information didn't come from them. It came from the snitch. And then everybody started reporting on it, right? Outlets like Push Square and Game Rant and Games Radar and YouTubers, everybody's covering it, right? Nobody's going to say, oh, I'm not going to make a video about it. I mean, obviously, I'm making a video about it, right? Well, the guy that sent the tweets and was kind of initially covering it, he said he got blocked by some developers from Santa Monica, and he was expressing sort of how that was kind of disappointing. Now, for me, if these leaks are totally fake and bogus, I don't think developers would pay any attention to it. I especially would expect somebody like Cory Barlog to just shoot it down. The fact that he hasn't shot it down and developers were actively blocking people who were spreading the stuff on Twitter, I actually think that adds some credence and credibility, because we do know from recent developments and developers speaking out, they really hate leaks, okay? They don't like it. They like things to come out, and they like to have the announcement and everything to be celebrated and not have it kind of a sour note. Like, we ran into this during Summer Game Fest. We knew about certain big announcements well beforehand, so when they happen, you're like, yeah, I already knew about the Metal Gear thing, right? Like, that did not land with as much punch as it would have, because it had been leaked for, you know, I don't even know how long, a couple of weeks already. So I could see developers seeing this get leaked and get irritated and say, come on, man, we were really excited to surprise everybody, especially because they shot down the possibility of DLC for God of War Ragnarok in the initial months after the game's release. They added like the New Game Plus, but they didn't necessarily give any indication that there'd be a DLC. In fact, they said no, there were no plans. So maybe at that time they were being truthful, like there were currently no plans. And then the very next day they sat down and said, hey, let's hammer out this DLC, let's get it going. Or maybe they were being very, very pedantic, and it's like, no, there's no plans to do DLC, and in the back of their mind, they're thinking, it's already made, right? There are no plans. There's no current plans. It's currently out of the planning stages, and it's in actual full production. I don't know if, you know, people who speak for games and on behalf of games, I don't know if they get that specific in, you know, in how they answer these questions, but I definitely think that they wanted this to be a surprise, and they wanted to kind of have it be a shock factor. There's rumors about, you know, a PlayStation Showcase or another State of Play or something this year, and that could be one of the big surprise announcements, and Santa Monica's like, come on, man, nobody would have seen this coming, and now we got some guy out here, the snitch, kind of ruining it. So I do think that adds credibility, and I do think that it's likely to be Atreus and not Kratos. I would be curious what you think. Would you play a DLC that is just Atreus and not Kratos? Are you interested in a standalone game? What do you want to see them do with Kratos long term? Lots of different theories floating out there, lots of different opinions. Obviously, you got to make sure you do this in a time frame where, you know, Christopher Judge wants to keep doing the voice. You wait too long and take too long to do another game, and, you know, he may be like, man, I've moved on to other things. I think he likes being Kratos a little bit too much to ever turn it down, though. So, as always, make sure and keep a membership up to date, or consider getting a membership to this channel. These videos typically roll over into members-only debrief, and if you want to be a part of those, you got to click that join button. If you can't do a membership, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you're pressing like and hanging out in the live shows. That's a great way to get a gifted member from our very generous community. As always, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.